Welcome to Crime Unveiled Podcast. Dive deep into the mysteries that captivate us. If you appreciate this episode, please consider liking and subscribing to support us. The year is 1692. The small, isolated Puritan community of Salem Village, Massachusetts, is about to be consumed by a wave of paranoia and fear. What began with the strange afflictions of a few young women would rapidly escalate into a frenzy of accusations, trials, and executions. We will unravel the complex web of social, religious, and political factors that fueled the Salem Witch Trials, a dark chapter in American history that continues to fascinate and horrify us centuries later. The unsettling silence before the storm, so to speak. Indeed. It is important to understand the context of 17th century Puritan society. Life was harsh, with a constant fear of the devil and a rigid social structure. The community was tightly knit, and deviations from religious norms were met with suspicion. The theocratic government, where religious leaders held significant political power, created an environment ripe for accusations of witchcraft. The Puritans believed that the devil could infiltrate their community by giving powers to individuals, whom he then used to carry out his evil work. This belief, combined with existing social tensions and personal rivalries within Salem Village, laid the groundwork for the tragic events that were about to unfold. We must carefully examine these underlying factors to fully comprehend the magnitude of the hysteria. The first accusations began with several young women, including Abigail Williams and Ann Putnam Jr., who exhibited bizarre behaviors, fits, contortions, and unintelligible screaming. They claimed to be afflicted by unseen forces, accusing several women in the village of bewitching them. These accusations, seemingly outlandish to us today, were taken seriously by the community. Steeped as it was in religious dogma and superstition, these initial accusations ignited a spark that would soon engulf the entire village in flames. The girl's testimony, dramatic and convincing, fueled the growing fear and suspicion, transforming minor disagreements and jealousies into accusations of witchcraft. The afflicted girls played a central role in the escalating events. Their symptoms, though possibly stemming from genuine psychological or physical ailments, were interpreted within the prevailing belief system as clear evidence of witchcraft. The intense pressure and social dynamics within the community likely exacerbated their behaviors. The girls' accusations were not random. They often targeted individuals who were already marginalized or vulnerable within Salem Village, further highlighting the power dynamics at play. Those accused were often women on the fringes of society, elderly, poor, or those with a reputation for unorthodox behavior. This targeting of specific individuals raises questions about the true motives behind the accusations. The accusations quickly spread, escalating from a few individuals to dozens. The afflicted girls, now seen as possessing a special sensitivity to the presence of witchcraft, became central figures in the investigations. They would identify supposed witches by falling into fits or pointing accusing fingers during examinations and trials. Their testimony, often dramatic and theatrical, played a significant role in convincing the authorities and the community of the veracity of the accusations. This created a self-perpetuating cycle of fear, where accusations led to more accusations, and the hysteria spiraled out of control. It is a chilling example of the power of mass delusion. The trials themselves were far from fair or impartial. Evidence was often based on spectral testimony, the afflicted girls claiming to see the spirits of the accused tormenting them. This type of evidence, inherently subjective and impossible to verify, was readily accepted by the court. Legal representation for the accused was limited, and confessions, often coerced under duress or the promise of leniency, were used as proof of guilt. These flawed legal procedures contributed to the tragic miscarriage of justice that unfolded in Salem. The system was designed to find guilt, not truth. The trials swiftly resulted in convictions, and the first executions began in June 1692. Bridget Bishop, an older woman known for her flamboyant attire and independent spirit, was the first to hang as a witch. Her execution marked a turning point, signaling the deadly seriousness of the situation and setting a grim precedent for the months to come. The speed and severity of the punishments shocked many, further fueling the climate of fear and distrust. The community, gripped by paranoia, seemed to lose its sense of reason and justice. The summer of 1692 saw the trials and executions reach their peak. 19 men and women were hanged as witches, and several others died in prison awaiting trial. The accusations continued to spread, reaching even into the highest levels of society. The community was deeply divided, with families torn apart by suspicion and accusations. This period represents the height of the hysteria, a time when fear and superstition reign supreme. It is a testament to the destructive power of mass delusion and the dangers of unchecked authority. The consequences were devastating, leaving a scar on the community and American history. Before the accusations and the trials, Salem Village was a small, isolated farming community. Days were filled with the rhythms of agricultural life. The rooster's crow, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the lowing of cattle. Families worked their land, tending to crops of corn, rye, and vegetables. The smell of wood smoke hung in the air, a constant reminder of the hearth fires that warmed homes against the New England chill. The villagers were devout Puritans, their lives centered around the church and its teachings. Sundays were reserved for prayer and reflection, a stark contrast to the physical labor of the week. Life was hard, but there was a sense of community, a shared purpose born from their shared faith and their dependence on one another for survival. It's hard to imagine this peaceful existence shattering so dramatically. It's almost impossible to reconcile the image of that serene village with the hysteria that gripped it. Imagine the children playing in the fields, their laughter echoing through the valley. Imagine the women gathering for spinning bees, sharing stories and gossip as their nimble fingers worked the wool. Imagine the men returning from a day of plowing, their faces weathered by the sun and wind. These were ordinary people, living ordinary lives. They were bound by a common faith, a shared set of beliefs that shaped their understanding of the world. They believed in God, in the devil, and in the power of unseen forces. This belief, this unshakable conviction, would ultimately become the catalyst for the tragedy that unfolded. The winter of 1691 was particularly harsh. The ground froze solid, making it difficult to bury the dead. Food supplies dwindled. Fear and anxiety gnawed at the edges of the community. Illness, always a threat, seemed to linger longer than usual. In the long, dark evenings, shadows danced on the walls, fueled by flickering candlelight and whispered anxieties. The villagers huddled around their fires, seeking warmth and comfort against the biting cold and the growing unease. Superstitions thrived in this atmosphere, a natural byproduct of fear and the unknown. Old wives' tales and folk remedies were passed down through generations, a blend of practical knowledge and ingrained belief. It's important to remember this context, the harsh realities of their lives and the power of their beliefs. Within this seemingly tight-knit community, there were also underlying tensions. Land disputes simmered beneath the surface, fueled by the scarcity of arable land and the pressures of a growing population. Personal grudges and rivalries festered, dividing families and neighbors. The strict social hierarchy of Puritan society meant that some families held more power and influence than others. These power dynamics, often unspoken, played a significant role in shaping the events to come. Accusations, once made, could easily exploit existing fault lines within the community, turning neighbor against neighbor. Reverend Samuel Parris, the village minister, was a stern and uncompromising figure. His sermons focused on the dangers of sin and the ever-present threat of Satan. His daughters, Abigail and Anne, along with their cousin Abigail Williams and friend Ann Putnam Jr., were among the first accusers. These young women, ranging in age from 9 to 17, held a certain social standing within the village, their proximity to the minister giving their words a particular weight. Their initial fits and strange behaviors, described as contortions, uncontrollable outbursts, and nonsensical babbling, quickly became the focus of attention within the community. Dr. William Griggs, the village physician, was called upon to examine the afflicted girls. Unable to find any physical cause for their symptoms, he attributed their condition to afflictions by witchcraft. This diagnosis, delivered by a figure of authority, legitimized the girls' claims and fueled the growing fear within the community. It's important to consider the limited medical knowledge of the time. Illnesses were often attributed to supernatural causes, and the concept of mental illness was poorly understood. In the absence of a rational explanation, the diagnosis of witchcraft provided a framework for understanding the inexplicable. The girls' accusations began with marginalized members of the community. Sarah Good, a homeless woman, Sarah Osborne, an elderly invalid, and Tituba, Reverend Parris's enslaved woman from Barbados. These women were easy targets, already vulnerable due to their social standing and their perceived otherness. Their stories, their backgrounds, and the prejudices against them contributed significantly to their swift condemnation. The accusations, once made, spread like wildfire through the community, igniting the flames of suspicion and fear. Imagine the fear that must have gripped the village as the accusations multiplied. Every twitch, every unexplained illness, every misfortune could be interpreted as a sign of witchcraft. The sense of community, once a source of strength, began to unravel as suspicion and distrust took root. The very fabric of their society, woven from shared faith and mutual dependence, began to tear apart. The whispers started softly, then grew louder, transforming into accusations that echoed through the streets and homes of Salem. It was a crucible of fear, where suspicion became evidence, and whispers became verdicts. We've painted a picture of Salem village life, the routines, the social structures, the religious fervor. It was a tightly knit community, bound by shared beliefs and a common purpose: survival in a harsh new land. Their days were filled with the familiar rhythms of farm work, prayer, and community gatherings. Children played in the fields, neighbors helped each other with harvests, and the church bell marked the passage of time. There was a sense of order, a predictability that defined their existence. But like a subtle shift in the wind, an unsettling element began to creep into this seemingly idyllic world. The first whispers of strange occurrences, unusual behaviors, began to circulate within the community, disrupting the established harmony. Yes, it's crucial to understand this backdrop of normalcy before we delve into the chaos that followed. Imagine these families, their lives intertwined, their routines deeply ingrained. They found comfort in the familiar, in the shared rhythms of their days. This sense of order made the ensuing events even more jarring, more disruptive. It's like a crack appearing in a perfectly smooth surface. The initial accusations, almost imperceptible at first, began to spread like tendrils through the village. They started as hushed whispers, rumors of strange afflictions and unusual behavior, but soon these whispers grew louder, morphing into accusations that would shatter the fragile peace of Salem village. The change was gradual, almost insidious. The first accusations were vague, centered around unexplained illnesses and unusual behavior in young women. These were attributed to various causes: natural ailments perhaps, or even the mischief of unruly children. But as the symptoms persisted and spread to other girls, a darker explanation began to take root. The whispers grew into pronouncements, the suspicion into certainty. The idea of witchcraft, a lurking evil within the community, began to gain traction. It was a seed planted in fertile ground, watered by fear and fueled by the unknown. It's important to remember the context of the time. Belief in the supernatural, particularly in the power of witchcraft, was widespread in 17th century New England. The Puritan worldview embraced the concept of a constant battle between good and evil, a spiritual warfare playing out in the everyday lives of the villagers. This belief system, coupled with the existing social tensions and anxieties within Salem, created a climate ripe for suspicion and accusation. Any deviation from the norm, any unexplained illness or unusual behavior, could be interpreted as a sign of demonic influence. These early signs, the strange fits and contortions exhibited by the young women, were initially met with confusion and concern. Doctors were consulted, remedies were tried, but the symptoms persisted. The girls complained of being pinched, pricked, and bitten by unseen forces. They would fall into trances, uttering strange cries and contorting their bodies in unnatural ways. These fits, witnessed by members of the community, added fuel to the growing fear. The inexplicable nature of the afflictions lent credence to the notion of something supernatural at play. The afflicted girls, initially seen as victims of some unknown malady, gradually became central figures in the unfolding drama. Their testimonies, their descriptions of torment and affliction, would hold immense sway over the community. Their words would become the primary evidence, shaping the course of the trials and determining the fate of the accused. It's a chilling example of how quickly fear and suspicion can escalate, transforming the afflicted into accusers and turning a community against itself. Imagine the escalating tension. The familiar faces of neighbors and friends now viewed with suspicion. The ordinary routines of daily life disrupted by fear and uncertainty. The once peaceful village, now gripped by the insidious whispers of witchcraft, began its descent into a dark chapter of American history. The accusations, once hesitant and veiled, began to take on a terrifying momentum. The shadows were lengthening in Salem, both literally as winter approached and figuratively as the grip of fear tightened. The familiar landscape, once a source of comfort and sustenance, now seemed imbued with a sinister presence. The very air seemed thick with suspicion. Every glance, every whisper carrying the potential for accusation. The idyllic image of Salem Village was about to be irrevocably shattered. We've laid the groundwork, discussing the societal pressures, the religious fervor, and the existing tensions within Salem Village. Now, let's delve into the initial incident that ignited the hysteria. In January 1692, several young women in the village, including Abigail Williams and Ann Putnam Jr., began exhibiting strange behaviors. These included fits, contortions, unintelligible screaming, and a seeming inability to control their bodies. Reverend Samuel Parris, Abigail's uncle and the village's minister, was deeply concerned by these inexplicable events unfolding within his own household. The girls' afflictions quickly attracted the attention of the community, with many fearing a supernatural cause. The prevailing belief system at the time readily attributed such unexplainable occurrences to witchcraft, planting the seed for what would become a terrifying chapter in American history. It's important to understand the context within which these events were interpreted. The Puritan community of Salem held a firm belief in the existence of the devil and his ability to influence individuals through witchcraft. Any deviation from the strict religious and social norms could be seen as suspicious, and the symptoms displayed by these young women easily fit into the existing framework of demonic possession. Dr. William Griggs, one of the physicians called to examine the girls, couldn't find any natural explanation for their ailments. His diagnosis of bewitchment provided a seemingly credible explanation and further fueled the growing fear and paranoia. This, coupled with the existing social tensions and rivalries within the village, created a perfect storm for accusations to escalate. These initial accusations targeted individuals considered to be social outcasts within the community. Sarah Good, a homeless woman, and Sarah Osborne, an elderly invalid, were among the first accused. Their marginalized status made them easy targets, as they lacked the social standing to defend themselves effectively. Tituba, Reverend Parris's enslaved woman from Barbados, also became a target. Her stories of voodoo and Caribbean folklore, likely misinterpreted and exaggerated, further contributed to the burgeoning belief in witchcraft. These three women represented the vulnerable within the community, those who could be readily scapegoated without much resistance. The accusations against Good, Osborne, and Tituba were based primarily on the testimony of the afflicted girls. They claimed to see the specters, or spirits, of these women tormenting them. These spectral afflictions, invisible to anyone but the accusers, became crucial evidence in the trials. It's worth noting that the girls' fits and accusations intensified whenever they were questioned or challenged. This performative aspect of their afflictions raised suspicions even at the time, but within the climate of fear and religious zeal, these doubts were often dismissed. The accusations against these three women marked the beginning of a chain reaction that would quickly spiral out of control. Under intense pressure and questioning, Tituba confessed to practicing witchcraft. Her confession, likely coerced and influenced by the prevailing beliefs and threats of severe punishment, provided apparent confirmation of the presence of witchcraft in Salem. She implicated Good and Osborne, further solidifying the accusations against them. This confession sent shockwaves through the community and legitimized the fears that had been brewing. It opened the floodgates, emboldening the accusers and encouraging others to come forward with their own claims of being afflicted. The examinations of Good, Osborne, and Tituba before local magistrates were dramatic and unsettling. The afflicted girls writhed and screamed, seemingly in agony, whenever the accused were brought near. They claimed to be bitten, pinched, and tormented by the invisible specters of the accused. These public displays of suffering intensified the belief in witchcraft and solidified the image of the accused as malevolent figures. These preliminary examinations, lacking any semblance of due process, set the stage for the formal trials that would follow. The accusations didn't stop with these three women. The initial accusations created a climate of fear and suspicion, leading to a domino effect. As the hysteria grew, the circle of accusations widened, ensnaring more and more individuals within the community. Prominent figures, including church members and community leaders, soon found themselves targeted, demonstrating how quickly the situation escalated beyond the initial marginalized victims. The dynamics of power, personal vendettas, and long-standing grievances began to play a significant role in who was accused. The initial incidents and accusations in Salem Village served as the catalyst for the mass hysteria that would grip the community. The combination of religious extremism, social anxieties, and the power of suggestion created a crucible where unfounded accusations could flourish. These first cases, marked by spectral evidence, coerced confessions, and public displays of suffering, established the dangerous precedents that would shape the course of the Salem Witch Trials. The tragedy that unfolded serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of mass hysteria and the fragility of justice in the face of fear and superstition. The trials concluded swiftly, a whirlwind of accusations, confessions coerced under duress, and tragically, executions. 19 men and women were hanged as witches on Gallows Hill, a grim spectacle that cast a long shadow over Salem. 5 others, including 2 infants, perished in the horrific conditions of the jail. The speed and the sheer number of convictions stunned the community. It's hard to imagine the collective trauma, the pervasive fear that gripped Salem in the wake of these events. Neighbors turned on neighbors, families were torn apart, and the very fabric of their society was unraveled by suspicion and paranoia. The air must have been thick with a sense of dread, a chilling premonition of what might come next. Exactly. The aftermath was just as disturbing as the trials themselves. The community was fractured, deeply divided. There was a palpable sense of unease, a constant fear that the accusations could begin anew at any moment. People began to question everything they thought they knew about their neighbors, their friends, even their families. The social order had been completely disrupted, replaced by an atmosphere of mistrust and suspicion. The trials left an indelible mark on the collective psyche of Salem, a wound that would take generations to heal. The very ground seemed cursed, stained with the blood of the innocent. It's a chilling chapter in American history, a stark reminder of the dangers of mass hysteria and the fragility of justice. One can only speculate about the psychological impact on the accusers, those young women whose testimonies condemned so many to death. Did they genuinely believe they were afflicted by witchcraft? Or were they caught up in a collective delusion fueled by social pressures and personal anxieties? Perhaps a combination of both. The historical record paints a complex picture, and it's difficult to definitively ascertain their motivations. Regardless, their words carried immense weight, shaping the course of the trials and ultimately sealing the fate of the accused. The weight of that responsibility, the knowledge of the consequences of their accusations, must have been a heavy burden to bear, undoubtedly. And consider the families of the accused, those left behind to grapple with the injustice of it all. Their loved ones were branded as witches, executed, and buried in unmarked graves. The stigma associated with witchcraft extended to the entire family, ostracizing them from the community and leaving them to contend with the social and economic repercussions. They were left to mourn in silence, their grief compounded by the shame and fear that permeated Salem. It's a testament to their resilience that they managed to rebuild their lives in the shadow of such tragedy. It's also important to consider the broader context of the time. The late 17th century was a period of great uncertainty and upheaval in New England. The colony was facing threats from Native American tribes, internal political divisions, and a harsh, unforgiving environment. These anxieties likely contributed to the climate of fear and suspicion that made the witch hunt possible. The Salem Witch Trials were not an isolated incident, but rather a reflection of the larger social and political forces at play in the colony. Precisely. The trials were a symptom of a deeper societal malaise. The Puritan belief system, with its emphasis on sin, temptation, and the constant battle between good and evil, created fertile ground for such anxieties to take root. The devil was a very real presence in their lives, a constant threat lurking just beneath the surface. In this context, the accusations of witchcraft provided a convenient scapegoat for the community's fears and frustrations. In the immediate aftermath, the trials continued, albeit with diminishing intensity. A few more individuals were accused, but the tide was beginning to turn. Doubts were creeping in. Questions were being raised about the validity of the spectral evidence that had played such a crucial role in the convictions. The seeds of skepticism were being sown, slowly but surely eroding the foundation of the witch hunt, and those seeds would eventually blossom into a full-blown reevaluation of the events that had transpired in Salem. Within a few years, the colony began to acknowledge the injustices that had been committed. Formal apologies were issued, reparations were paid to the families of the victims, and efforts were made to restore their reputations. The Salem Witch Trials became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked fear and the importance of due process. Let's delve deeper into the psychological landscape of Abigail Williams, one of the central accusers in the Salem Witch Trials. She was an orphaned servant girl, living in a highly restrictive Puritan society, a society steeped in religious dogma and fear of the devil. This environment likely fostered a sense of powerlessness and vulnerability in young Abigail. The trials, in a perverse way, offered her an opportunity to seize control, to gain a voice she previously lacked. By accusing others of witchcraft, she positioned herself at the center of the narrative, dictating the course of events in a community where her status would normally afford her little influence. It is worth examining how her accusations, whether consciously or subconsciously, served as a means of navigating her marginalized position within Salem's rigid social hierarchy. That's a crucial point. Consider the psychological impact of the Puritan belief system on someone like Abigail. The constant emphasis on sin, damnation, and the ever-present threat of satanic influence undoubtedly created an atmosphere of paranoia and suspicion. In such a climate, any deviation from the norm, any perceived transgression, could be interpreted as evidence of demonic activity. This pervasive fear likely amplified existing anxieties and contributed to the mass hysteria that gripped Salem. Abigail's accusations, viewed through this lens, become less about individual malice and more about the collective anxieties of a community struggling to comprehend the unknown within a framework of religious extremism. We need to understand the context of fear in which these accusations arose. Absolutely. There's also the intriguing contradiction between Abigail's public persona and her private actions. Outwardly, she presented herself as a pious and devout young woman, conforming to the strict moral codes of Puritan society. However, her accusations paint a different picture, one of manipulation, deceit, and a thirst for power. This dissonance between her public image and her alleged actions raises questions about her underlying motivations. Was she a genuine believer, convinced of the presence of witchcraft in Salem, Oregon? Was she a cunning opportunist, exploiting the prevailing fear for her own gain? This contradiction is key to understanding her role in the trials. The power dynamic she manipulated deserves further scrutiny. Before the trials, Abigail held a relatively low social standing as a servant. Her accusations, however, elevated her to a position of prominence. Suddenly, she was the center of attention, her words carrying significant weight within the community. This newfound power, combined with the underlying fear and paranoia, likely fueled her continued accusations. It's a classic example of how social dynamics can be exploited in times of crisis. The trials provided her with a platform to reshape her social standing, however tragically. Precisely. And we also have to consider the possibility of psychological suggestion and mass hysteria playing a role in shaping the events. Abigail's initial accusations may have triggered a chain reaction, influencing the perceptions and behaviors of others in the community. In an atmosphere of heightened anxiety and fear, individuals might have become more susceptible to suggestion, leading to false memories and distorted perceptions. This collective delusion, fueled by religious fervor and social pressure, could have contributed to the rapid escalation of the trials. That collective delusion is a critical component of understanding the Salem Witch Trials. The fear of witchcraft was so ingrained in the Puritan mindset that it created a fertile ground for mass hysteria to take root. Abigail's accusations acted as a catalyst, igniting a firestorm of fear and suspicion that quickly spread throughout the community. In such a charged atmosphere, rational thought and critical judgment were often replaced by blind faith and unwavering belief in the accusations. The trials became a self-perpetuating cycle of fear, driven by social conformity and the desire to protect oneself from suspicion. Looking at the historical accounts and the various interpretations, one can't help but wonder if Abigail experienced any remorse or guilt in the aftermath of the trials. Did she maintain her conviction in the veracity of her accusations? Or did she eventually come to realize the devastating consequences of her actions? This remains a lingering question, a testament to the complex and enigmatic nature of Abigail Williams, and her role in one of history's most infamous episodes of mass hysteria. It's a question that continues to fascinate and haunt us. The Salem Witch Trials serve as a stark reminder of the dangers of mass hysteria, the power of social influence, and the devastating consequences of unchecked fear. Understanding the psychology of key figures like Abigail Williams provides crucial insight into the underlying forces that propelled this tragic chapter in American history, and it's a lesson that remains relevant even today. Let's delve into the investigative process during the Salem Witch Trials, or rather, the lack thereof. What passed for investigation back then bears little resemblance to modern forensic practices. Accusations, often stemming from personal grudges or social anxieties, fueled the trials. Spectral evidence, the testimony of afflicted individuals claiming to see the accused Dyad's spirit tormenting them, held significant weight. This made it virtually impossible for the accused to defend themselves. There were no standards for collecting physical evidence, no cross-examination of accusers, and a general disregard for due process. The court operated more on fear and superstition than on fact.
This absence of a structured investigation contributed significantly to the tragic miscarriage of justice.
Exactly. The reliance on spectral evidence essentially meant the accusers held all the power. They could point a finger at anyone, claiming they saw their spirit engaging in witchcraft, and that was often enough to seal the accused dag's fate. Imagine the pressure on those afflicted individuals, many of them young women, to conform to the narrative of witchcraft. Their testimonies, likely influenced by social pressures, mass hysteria, and perhaps even genuine psychological distress, became the driving force of the trials. This lack of objective evidence, combined with the emotionally charged atmosphere, made it nearly impossible to conduct a fair and impartial investigation. It's a chilling example of how fear and superstition can override reason and justice.
One can only speculate about the missed leads and unexplored avenues that a proper investigation might have uncovered. Perhaps, with careful examination, they might have identified underlying medical conditions or psychological factors contributing to the afflicted girl's behavior. Or maybe they would have discovered evidence of interpersonal conflicts and rivalries fueling the accusations. The reliance on spectral evidence effectively shut down any possibility of a genuine investigation, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of fear and accusation. The court, it seems, was not interested in pursuing any line of inquiry that might challenge the prevailing narrative of witchcraft.
We also have documented instances of taunting communications between the accusers and the accused. These exchanges, often laced with veiled threats and accusations, further fueled the paranoia and suspicion surrounding the trials. While these communications could have potentially shed light on the dynamics between the accusers and the accused, they were often interpreted as further evidence of guilt. Imagine the desperation of the accused, trying to plead their innocence while facing such manipulative tactics. The lack of a structured investigation meant these communications, instead of being scrutinized for their potential relevance, were simply added to the pile of accusations.
The records also hint at instances of false hope. Perhaps a respected community member vouched for the accused, or a moment of doubt flickered within the court. These glimmers of hope, however fleeting, must have been agonizing for the accused and their families, only to be dashed by the overwhelming tide of fear and superstition. It's heartbreaking to consider the emotional toll of these moments of false hope, the brief respite before the inevitable return to despair. The system, rigged against them from the start, offered little chance of escape.
The lack of legal representation further compounded the challenges faced by the accused. They had no one to advocate for them, to challenge the evidence, to ensure their rights were protected. In this environment, even a glimmer of hope could quickly turn into another nail in the coffin. The power dynamics were so skewed that even the slightest perceived transgression could be interpreted as evidence of guilt. The absence of legal counsel ensured that the voices of the accused were effectively silenced. Looking back at the transcripts and historical accounts, we see a community gripped by fear, a legal system devoid of due process, and a complete disregard for objective evidence. The Salem Witch Trials remain a stark reminder of the dangers of mass hysteria and the crucial importance of a just and impartial legal system. The absence of a proper investigation, coupled with the reliance on spectral evidence, ensured that the trials became a tragic exercise in injustice.
Indeed. The Salem Witch Trials serve as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the fragility of justice in the face of fear and superstition. The trials highlight the devastating consequences of abandoning reason and due process, and the vital importance of critical thinking and skepticism, even in the face of overwhelming social pressure. The legacy of Salem reminds us that the pursuit of justice must always be grounded in evidence, fairness, and a commitment to truth. The Salem Witch Trials, while historically significant, cast a long shadow of trauma and unease over the community and beyond. We often focus on the immediate horrors of the trials, the accusations, the trials themselves, and the executions. But what about the aftermath? The lingering fear, the broken families, and the societal scars that remained for generations. These less tangible consequences are just as crucial to understanding the true impact of this dark chapter in American history. Consider the children left orphaned, the families torn apart by suspicion and accusations, and the widespread fear that permeated daily life long after the trials concluded. How did these individuals, and the community as a whole, cope with the psychological and emotional fallout of such a traumatic event? The emotional toll was immense.
Imagine living in a community where your neighbor, your friend, even your family member could suddenly accuse you of witchcraft. The constant fear and paranoia must have been suffocating. Trust eroded, relationships fractured, and the very fabric of society was torn apart. Beyond the immediate victims of the trials,
The entire community suffered from a collective trauma. The trials created a climate of fear and distrust that lingered for decades, impacting social interactions, economic stability, and even religious practices. This long-term unease shaped the community's identity and influenced its development for generations to come. It's vital to consider this lasting impact when studying the Salem Witch Trials, as it reveals a much deeper and more complex picture of the events and their consequences. The trials created a pervasive sense of vulnerability. Anyone could be accused, and the accusations were often based on flimsy evidence, spectral testimony, or personal vendettas. This created an environment where no one felt safe, where neighbors eyed each other with suspicion, and where trust was irrevocably broken. The trials not only claimed the lives of the accused, but also shattered the lives of their families. Children were left without parents, spouses lost their partners, and families were ostracized and shunned by the community. The social and economic ramifications were devastating, and the emotional scars ran deep. These wounds were passed down through generations, contributing to a collective memory of fear, injustice, and trauma. Precisely. The Salem Witch Trials became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of mass hysteria, religious extremism, and the abuse of power. The trials exposed the fragility of individual rights and the susceptibility of communities to fear and manipulation. The long-term impact went beyond the immediate victims and their families, shaping the legal system, religious practices, and social interactions in the colonies. The trials prompted a reassessment of legal procedures, leading to reforms that emphasized due process and the importance of evidence-based accusations. The events also sparked a debate about the role of religion in society and the dangers of religious extremism. The Salem Witch Trials serve as a stark reminder of the importance of critical thinking, due process, and the protection of individual rights. The events of 1692 should be studied not only as a historical event, but also as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power, social hysteria, and the fragility of justice. The psychological and emotional toll on the victims, their families, and the community as a whole cannot be overstated. These less tangible consequences are often overlooked, yet they are just as important as the more visible aspects of the trials. By examining the long-term impact of the trials, we gain a deeper understanding of the human cost of injustice and the enduring power of trauma.
It is important to consider how communities rebuild after such a devastating event. The process of healing and reconciliation is complex and often takes generations. In Salem, the process involved acknowledging the injustices, offering apologies to the victims and their families, and establishing memorials to commemorate the lives lost. This process of remembrance and reconciliation is crucial not only for healing but also for preventing similar tragedies from occurring in the future. By learning from the mistakes of the past, we can work towards creating a more just and equitable society. The Salem Witch Trials highlight the complexities of human behavior and the fragility of social order. They demonstrate how quickly fear and suspicion can escalate into mass hysteria, leading to devastating consequences for individuals and communities. The events of 1692 offer valuable lessons about the importance of critical thinking, due process, and the protection of individual rights. By examining this dark chapter in American history, we can gain insights into the human condition and work towards preventing similar tragedies from happening again. The trials continue to resonate with us today because they speak to fundamental questions about justice, morality, and the human capacity for both good and evil. And it's precisely for those reasons that we must continue to study, analyze, and discuss the Salem Witch Trials. The lessons learned from this historical event are timeless and relevant to contemporary society. By understanding the factors that contributed to the mass hysteria and the devastating consequences that followed, we can work towards building a more just and equitable future. The Salem Witch Trials serve as a potent reminder of the importance of safeguarding individual rights, upholding the rule of law, and fostering a culture of critical thinking and reasoned discourse. The trials were a tragedy, but they also offer a valuable opportunity for reflection, learning, and growth. As we delve deeper into the heart of the Salem Witch Trials, the narrative takes a chilling turn. We've established the socio-political climate, the simmering tensions within the community, and the power dynamics at play. Now, we focus on the unraveling of key figures in this tragic drama. Abigail Williams, initially portrayed as a victim, began to exhibit increasingly erratic behavior. Her accusations grew wilder, implicating more and more individuals, escalating from marginalized community members to prominent figures. This shift marked a crucial point in the trials,
raising suspicion even amongst the most fervent believers. The sheer number of accusations began to strain credulity, prompting some to question the veracity of Williams' claims. This growing skepticism laid the groundwork for the eventual downfall of the accusers. Indeed, the escalating accusations created a climate of paranoia and distrust. The court, initially swayed by the emotional testimonies and spectral evidence presented by Williams and other accusers, started to grapple with the sheer scale of the accusations. The testimonies, often reliant on subjective experiences and unverifiable claims, became increasingly difficult to substantiate. As the trials progressed, cracks began to appear in the seemingly airtight narratives. Discrepancies emerged, and the accusers' stories, once perceived as unified and compelling, started to unravel under scrutiny. This gradual erosion of credibility set the stage for a turning point in the trials, a moment where the tide began to turn against the accusers. The turning point arrived with the questioning of Abigail Williams' motives. Whispers of personal vendettas and power plays began to circulate. Some speculated that Williams and her circle were using the trials to settle old scores, to eliminate rivals, or to gain social standing. This shift in perspective marked a significant break from the previous unquestioning acceptance of the accusations. People started to look beyond the supernatural explanations and consider the very real human motivations that could be driving the events. The focus began to shift from the accused to the accusers themselves. The scrutiny intensified when inconsistencies in Williams' testimony were brought to light. Her descriptions of spectral encounters, often vivid and dramatic, began to contradict themselves and the testimonies of other accusers. These contradictions, initially overlooked in the fervor of the trials, now became glaring red flags. The court, increasingly aware of the potential for manipulation and falsehood, started to approach the accusations with a newfound skepticism. This growing doubt, fueled by the mounting inconsistencies, paved the way for a closer examination of the evidence, or lack thereof. The examination of evidence, or rather the lack of it, became a central issue. The trials had largely relied on spectral evidence, testimony based on dreams, visions, and other intangible experiences. This form of evidence, highly subjective and impossible to verify, came under intense scrutiny. The court, realizing the flimsy nature of this evidence, began to demand more concrete proof. The absence of physical evidence, combined with the growing doubts about the accuser's credibility, created a critical turning point in the trials. This demand for tangible evidence marked a pivotal moment. It signaled a shift from the reliance on subjective experiences to a more objective evaluation of the facts. As the court pressed for concrete proof, the accusations began to crumble. The lack of physical evidence, combined with the growing inconsistencies in the testimonies, exposed the fragility of the case against the accused. This realization led to a gradual reassessment of the entire proceedings, and the tide began to turn. Amidst this growing skepticism, an investigation into the accusers themselves commenced. This investigation uncovered a web of personal grievances, rivalries, and power struggles within the Salem community. The investigation revealed that many of the accusations were rooted not in genuine belief in witchcraft, but in personal vendettas and the desire for social advancement. This revelation further eroded the credibility of the accusers and cast a dark shadow over the entire proceedings. With the weight of evidence against them, Abigail Williams and several other key accusers were finally apprehended. The arrests were carried out quietly, almost anticlimactically, in stark contrast to the dramatic and public accusations that had characterized the trials. The quiet nature of the arrests almost underscored the sense of disillusionment and the dawning realization of the injustice that had been perpetrated. The arrest of the accusers marked not only the end of their reign of terror, but also the beginning of a long and painful process of reckoning for the community of Salem. As we conclude our exploration of the Salem Witch Trials, it's essential to reflect on the chilling ease with which ordinary life transformed into a crucible of fear and paranoia. The speed and totality with which the accusations escalated, tearing apart families and the community, remains a stark warning. These weren't isolated incidents. They formed a terrifying pattern. Neighbor turned against neighbor, friend against friend, and the very fabric of Salem Village unraveled in a matter of months. The testimonies, often contradictory and based on spectral evidence, held immense power, demonstrating the dangerous susceptibility of the human psyche to suggestion and mass hysteria. The court, meant to be a bastion of justice, became an instrument of this hysteria, accepting the flimsiest of evidence. Precisely. And what's perhaps most unsettling is the apparent ordinariness of the accusers and the accused. These were people living seemingly normal lives, farmers, ministers, housewives, until the accusations began. This highlights the insidious nature of such events. The potential for seemingly ordinary individuals to become caught in a web of delusion and inflict unimaginable harm. The trials weren't just about witchcraft. They became a power struggle, a settling of scores, and a reflection of the underlying tensions within the community. Land disputes, personal rivalries, and religious anxieties all played a part. Fueled by superstition and fear of the unknown, the Salem Witch Trials serve as a dark reminder of the fragility of reason and the ever-present potential for evil to lurk beneath the surface of everyday life. The trials also expose the dangers of unchecked authority and the susceptibility of legal systems to manipulation. The judges, influenced by the prevailing social and religious climate, allowed spectral evidence, essentially the testimony of dreams and visions, to be admitted in court. This created a climate where accusations were virtually impossible to refute. The absence of due process and the reliance on coerced confessions further compounded the injustice. Even those who confessed, often to save their lives, were condemned. The trials became a self-perpetuating cycle of fear and accusation, spiraling out of control until the governor finally intervened, realizing the travesty that was unfolding. And while the official trials ended, their shadow lingered for generations. The reputations of the accused were forever tarnished, their families bearing the stigma of witchcraft long after the hysteria subsided. The economic and social fabric of Salem Village was irrevocably damaged. The trials became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the dangers of mass hysteria, religious extremism, and the abuse of power. It compels us to consider how easily such events could be repeated, even in different forms, in any society where fear and prejudice are allowed to take root. The Salem Witch Trials force us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the seeds of such events exist within us all. The potential for cruelty, for succumbing to fear and suspicion, resides in every community. It's a chilling thought. We like to believe we've evolved, that we're more enlightened. But the history of human behavior suggests otherwise. From the witch hunts of Europe to the McCarthy era in the United States, history is replete with examples of societies gripped by paranoia and suspicion. The Salem Witch Trials remain a potent symbol of these darker impulses, a stark reminder of the fragility of reason and justice. Indeed, the trials remind us that the line between sanity and madness, between reason and superstition, is often thinner than we'd like to believe. They challenge us to examine our own prejudices and biases, to question our assumptions, and to resist the temptation to succumb to fear and suspicion. The Salem Witch Trials weren't simply a historical anomaly. They offer a timeless lesson about the dangers of unchecked power, the fragility of truth, and the ever-present potential for darkness to erupt, even in the most ordinary of settings. It's a lesson we would do well to remember, particularly in our own time, when misinformation and fear can spread rapidly, fueled by social and political anxieties. As we conclude this exploration of the Salem Witch Trials, we're left with lingering questions. Could such a thing happen again? Are we truly immune to the forces that drove the events of 1692? Have we learned the lessons of Salem, Oregon? Do the seeds of fear and superstition still lie dormant within us, waiting for the right conditions to sprout anew? These are unsettling questions, but they are questions we must ask ourselves if we are to truly understand the darkness that resides in the human heart, and, more importantly, if we are to prevent such tragedies from ever happening again. The whispers of Salem echo across the centuries, reminding us of the fragility of justice and the insidious power of fear. They serve as a chilling testament to the human capacity for both great good and unimaginable evil. And they leave us with a lingering question. What darkness lies hidden in plain sight, waiting to be unleashed? Thank you for walking with us through the shadows. The story doesn't end here. It lingers, echoing through time, reminding us that the darkest truths often hide in plain sight. Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant. Goodbye.